College football nerds here talking the second game of the semifinals in the playoffs, and that's Notre Dame and Penn State. I'm here to take a victory lap because I picked Notre Dame to beat Georgia. Josh, the SEC homer that he is, just couldn't bring himself to do it. That's a joke. We're really pretty objective around here, even though y'all don't think we are. Anyway, we're going to get into something pretty interesting to start, and that's our model has this game a 1.5 favorite for Notre Dame, and Vegas has this game a 1.5 favorite for Notre Dame. And Josh, that really doesn't mean much in terms of separating one team from another, does it?
It really doesn't. When you get to that point, it's not even that it's saying that Notre Dame would win 6 out of 10 times. That's almost saying that they'd win 5 out of 5 or 5 out of 10. Not 5 out of 5. It's splitting hairs. And I think there are a lot of interesting things that have come about with the playoffs. You know, our argument throughout had been that 12 was too many. We'd had major complaints with the way things were seeded. I'm not going to go into detail on that because it's been beaten to death. But one of the, I think, sort of upshots of the playoffs so far, according to our model system, you can go to collegefootballnerds.com and look at our model, stats, rankings, all that. The higher rated team has won every playoff game, which I find interesting. According to FBI, I took a snapshot before the playoffs. The higher rated team has won every playoff game. Even more interesting to me, the top scoring defense in our system, which we have an opponent-adjusted set of those stats, has actually won every playoff game. And that actually even tracks closer to why games were blowouts, because those particular matchups were all pretty spaced out. And it didn't, just long story short, doesn't necessarily result in the top 4 scoring defenses, the top 4 teams being the last 4 teams standing, but it does mean the top teams, or the higher-rated teams, including Notre Dame over Georgia, have won. Notre Dame was, 3rd in our ranking? Georgia, not really highly thought of. They're down at 5th. Notre Dame's 3rd, and Georgia was 15th. Something we talked about, and is normal when we ignore our model, we get proven wrong. And now, I'm not going to go into all the repercussions of that, what it means, etc. We talked about that at length in the preview we did for the Texas-Ohio State game. So I'll say, if you find that factoid interesting, or you want to hear that discussion at length, go watch the first 5 minutes of the video. We talk about what it means and on all the repercussions from those few stats. But I'm just going to drop the numbers right here. And Daniel, I'll turn it back to you, because I think what we want to talk about here is, knowing that fact, how do you think it reflects on this game between a Notre Dame team that we have ranked 3rd and a Penn State team that we have ranked 7th overall? And then in scoring defense, it is a Notre Dame team that is ranked 3rd and a Penn State team that is ranked 6th in scoring defense overall.
What we've found throughout the playoffs, really broader, take a picture, step back in college football in general, defenses are king again. Same thing in NFL. These 2 defenses are 2 of the better defenses in college football in this playoffs, and it's not a shocker based on the seeding and the opponents they got that they are, standing here and not sitting at home. It's interesting to me to see that the yards per play in our model are super close, 5.2 for both of them. Neither one of these teams is expected to have a good passing day. Ironically, we give Drew Allar a hard time. He's expected to do a little bit better. I think that neither one of these teams are going to be able to throw the ball. But Josh, the question is, can one of these teams run the ball? I know that both of these rushing attacks have been just really good this year. People don't realize that Penn State ran for 300 yards on Oregon. And Oregon, for all their faults that they showed against Ohio State, was a pretty solid, not elite, but a pretty solid defense. And 300 is no joke. We saw what Notre Dame did in the first game running the ball against Indiana, who's also had a pretty good defense. But this is a game, Josh, where both of these teams, interestingly, only one of these teams has faced a team with a front 7 that is of a upper tier national standard, and that's Notre Dame, at least in the playoffs. Do you think there's a situation here where Penn State, having not faced a great defense yet, might be a little bit shocked in a way that Notre Dame isn't? We're talking about conference championship games. We're talking about playoff games. We're talking about the fact that this is the first year ever that teams are going to be hosting these games at home, probably higher ticket allotments. We've got a partner, a sponsor on this one that's going to help you find those tickets. It's SeatGeek. Josh, why don't you let us know what SeatGeek's got going on?
if you want to go out there and find a way to go watch the first year ever with home game, playoff games, go to South Bend, go to Happy Valley. SeatGeek is the #1 rated app on the internet for finding tickets. 28 million downloads, 70,000 events, anything from sports to music. If you go to the app, you can see everything they've got to offer. You can look at all the different events in your area. And if you think college football playoff, I mean, right here, anything you want to go to, they've got all the different events, all the different venues. SeatGeek, go look for the green dot. They rate the seats best to worst, 1 through 10. Green means good, red means bad. It's a great app and a great way to go see ball games.
By the way, you can use that app, you can use that website and preview what the seats would look like if you were sitting in them, which is a good way to help you decide which ones to purchase. And you know we came through for you guys. Use our code NERDS for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code NERDS. Make sure you click the link in the description and download that app.
Well, I think, obviously Penn State's faced some good defenses throughout the season. But, the flip side of that is when they faced them, they didn't do particularly well, right? I mean, they played Ohio State. That game was 20-13. Didn't have a lot of offensive pop in general. Wisconsin is a somewhat good defense, and they struggled a little bit. Illinois is a somewhat good defense. They struggled a little bit. They have kind of, looked like a team that, struggles against better defenses, with the exception of really that Oregon game, which I'm still not sure what that said about Oregon, if maybe Oregon in the championship game was the reality that Oregon was a deeply flawed team that none of us saw. Because again, Oregon's schedule was kind of Ohio State or bust itself. It's kind of the problem of this season is there's so much isolation, at least for us stat nerds. But, the thing I will say is it's also interesting to note that our metrics don't necessarily love Notre Dame's run defense, which I find interesting. I mean, they shut down Georgia. Now, Georgia's run offense has not been particularly good. First-time quarterback. Notre Dame was kind of keying against the run in that game, loading the box pretty heavily. But we have them as the 25th best rush defense per play. These are the third best scoring defense because they're the #1 pass defense in the country, which I think makes sense if you watch them. But particularly with the injury situation at all three levels of the defense, with Riley Mills being out in the interior, I think you can get a little bit of push. And so, I agree with you that Penn State hasn't necessarily faced defenses of this caliber outside Ohio State, but that's not shocking. Ohio State's #1, Notre Dame's #3 in our defensive metrics. Nobody's faced defenses like this, except if you've played those teams. I think, though, that the matchup itself compensates for that a little bit. Because Notre Dame's defense, as good as it is, and look, 25th is not bad. It is still quite good. They are more susceptible to the run than they are the pass in general. And teams may have thrown some on them. USC threw some on them, but usually in desperation mode, usually one-dimensionally. If you want to be a balanced offense, you're probably better off running the ball, at least to get some yardage. And especially true in a game like this, where it is due to likely be a low-scoring game. And I say that because, again, Penn State's 6th in defense. They're 6th in pass defense in our metrics and 15th in run defense. They're a little bit more balanced. I think they're a little bit more sound. If I had a critique of Penn State, and a lot of this comes from the Oregon game, but I saw it a little bit with USC and others, I think Penn State, I don't even know if I want to call it an athleticism issue. Maybe it's an angle issue. There are signs that high-level talent in the passing game can expose them somewhat. That maybe they don't have the ability to play against a high-functioning offense with high-level receiving talent in a high-level passing game, which, to be frank, there are not many of those this year. But there's signs of that. I don't think Notre Dame's the team to exploit it, though, because Riley Leonard, really, they beat Georgia with Riley Leonard's legs, period. Penn State should be able to take that away. So when you look at, again, everything being relative, I think Notre Dame's defense is really good, but I don't know that it's so good against the run that Penn State can't run the ball and score some. And in a relative matchup, given the fact that Penn State is a good matchup defensively for Notre Dame, you start running into this reality, Daniel, where I think this is a low-scoring game. I think Notre Dame may be on average, in my opinion, I'll say right now, I think they're probably the better team by some tiny margin on average. But I'm not sure that the matchup specifically favor Notre Dame such that the gap that exists between them closes and you end up with these two teams being very, very close together, which our model and power rankings also suggest.
Josh, if you just quickly, do you think that this game, though, really comes down to whichever quarterback does play acceptably well, decent, good? Do you think it comes down to that?
I think so. And I think it also comes down to turnovers, game management. If you're a Penn State fan, I think that ought to concern you a little bit because James Franklin has not been great in these games historically, to say the least. They have not managed things well. They have not been aggressive when they need to be aggressive. They've not been sound in their decision making to take advantage of games. They've gotten exploited at times. Notre Dame under Freeman has really played up to their competition, I think, in a lot of their bigger games. Now, they've had problems with dropping stupid games, 2 of their last 3 years. But in bigger games, Freeman has seemingly been a bit more of a big game coach in a lot of ways. And so I do think the quarterback that plays the bigger game is going to have the bigger hand. But I will turn it around, Daniel, and say, I think if either one of these teams tries to overplay their hand with a quarterback, it could really go against them. Notre Dame could have an effective game throwing the football if they do it in spurts and they get Penn State a little bit on the heels, running the ball and running Riley Leonard a lot. I'm not sure that I want Riley Leonard throwing the ball any more than I want him running it. Meaning, I'm not sure I don't want the same number of carries and passes from him. Because I think if he's throwing into the secondary that's able to tee off and Abdul Carter is able to tee off in obvious passing situations, Notre Dame's going to have a problem. I think you have to be smart and conservative and realize a lot of times you want to just run the ball at the middle and punt. The Georgia game panned that out. And, let me use that as an example because I'm the one that tweeted it. As I say, all the bad tweets are Daniel's, the good tweets are mine. I think these days with what is a newborn in my household, most tweets have been Daniel's the past couple months. But I don't think Georgia wins that game if they play it 10 more times. Maybe they win it once. Georgia wasn't going to score in that game. But they played it wrong for sure because they were aggressive at the end of the first half with an offense that wasn't moving the ball. Their offensive line was at a mismatch to the defensive line at that Notre Dame was bringing to bear. It created a negative play, dug them a hole, kickoff return, and they were buried. The thing to me was Notre Dame's just momentum was such that I did not think Georgia could really match their scoring almost regardless. We can have a longer conversation about what they look like with Beck. I probably would pick Georgia in a rematch with Beck, just being honest. But it's because I think they're 2 or 3 touchdowns better. And I think they find a way to score some and maybe avoid a negative play. And that might have been enough because Notre Dame's offense wasn't doing a whole lot. But they were smart not to do a whole lot. Maybe they could have in the second half if they needed to. They didn't in the first half, but maybe they could have. Penn State defensively is better than Georgia. They just are. Georgia, we talked about a lot. They're really defensively in our metrics are like a top 25-ish defense maybe. They're not particularly good. Their offense was pretty good. Stockton didn't play poorly. I thought he actually played pretty well. But they don't have you can't run the full playbook with a redshirt freshman. They didn't make splash plays. They were undoubtedly more conservative throwing the ball downfield, nor could they really throw the ball downfield without doing so in danger. And so I think you end up in this situation where I actually think the ability to manage the small moments, not to try to be overly aggressive, is important. I think there are times when you're going to have to be aggressive, but they have to be the right times with the right result. And if you try to be aggressive at the wrong time like Georgia did for either team, that will lose you this game. And it may be that neither team is overly aggressive, probably to the frustration of both fan bases. But this is the kind of game that I think is going to be won based off making the fewest mistakes, not the most big plays. And, Daniel, frankly, that makes it a very hard game to pick.
All right, so that's a good segue because I'm ready to pick. And Penn State fans have been all over me all year because I've said on Twitter, good tweets are mine, I said on Twitter that Drew Allar is a 6 to 7 yard per attempt kind of guy in most games, in most scenarios. We're not talking about against FCS teams or Akron or Kent State or whatever. In most games, he's going to give you about 6.5 yards per attempt, and that's not good. It's almost serviceable. In the modern where defenses rule, it's okay. Here's who he's been against ranked teams this year. 5.8 yards per attempt, 7.3, 6.4, 6.8, 5.8. I got eviscerated by Penn State fans for saying this. It's just the truth. And I'm going to stand on it because he might blow up this game. It'll be the first time against, in a big game. He's played some bad defenses too. SMU, Oregon's pass defense, not great. He's just a 6.5 yard per attempt kind of guy. But here's the problem. Riley Leonard might be worse. Against Georgia, Josh, I don't know if have you looked at what he did statistically against Georgia?
Yeah, you're stealing my thunder on this, but go ahead, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to make you guess, but 3.8 yards per attempt. That is non-functional. That's not 6.5 yards per attempt. That is non-functional. The only reason Notre Dame won that game is because we called it before the game. This is why I picked Notre Dame to win it against Georgia. Georgia struggles against running quarterbacks. Riley Leonard, QB power up the middle. It took them 3 quarters to solve it. And I don't know if they really did solve it. It's an incomplete for Penn State. We don't know how they do against running quarterbacks because they haven't really faced one this year. But I got to imagine they're going to be better than Georgia. And I got to imagine if he puts up 3.5 yards, 4 yards an attempt against Penn State, it doesn't matter if he's effective with QB power. They're not going to win this game. A lot of what they got in that game against Georgia was that middle 8. And remind everybody, one of those touchdowns was not directed by the offense. Actually, 2 of them weren't. It was a turnover and a special teams touchdown. I don't think they're going to find the offense against what I think is a very good Penn State defense. And for all of my criticism of Drew Allar and his 6.5 yards per attempt, I think against a good team in this situation, that's going to be enough to win. Give me Penn State 24, Notre Dame 20. What you got?
I'm closely aligned with you, Daniel. I mean, I just think Penn State is a bad matchup for Notre Dame. I talked about how it squeezed the two together. Something I'd mentioned when we did the video for Ohio State and Texas was where the money is. And, for whatever it's worth, OddsShark, which is giving information, supposedly the betting handle information per BetMGM, 69% of bets are on Notre Dame, 73% of the money is on Notre Dame. And most people have the under. Actually, 75% have the under at 45.5. That number, the under, often will pick it. But when you get that low, it's hard to stay that low because it's really easy for random plays to creep the score higher. But I got Penn State. I've got them. I'm going to say 27-24. I haven't been super high on Penn State all year, which Penn State fans aren't happy with. I'm bringing this up to draw even more heat on myself, which is stupid, but I'm just going to own it. I think the run game is very good. I think Allar, you said he's a 6.5 yard per attempt guy, but he's an 8.6 yard per attempt guy on the season overall. Riley Leonard is a 6.8 yard per attempt guy on the season. And I just don't think they're going to be able to throw the ball. Period. I mean, they opened the game 5.3 yards per attempt against Texas A&M, 5.1 yard per attempt against Northern Illinois. They have thrown under 200 yards in most of their games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of their games. They have never this season against anyone thrown for 250 yards. I don't know how you beat Penn State doing that. Unless the game is really low scoring, I don't see it. And so, ultimately, I think Penn State is good enough in the front 7 and sound enough defensively that they're going to be able to stop the quarterback run or play it honestly. I don't think Notre Dame has the pieces to attack Penn State's secondary, which I think may be their weakness, if they have one defensively, because they've been quite good. And look, I don't think Penn State's going to be overly effective whatsoever against Notre Dame's defense, but there's signs that you can run somewhat on Notre Dame. And the thing with Drew Allar is, even if he's a 6 yard per attempt guy, my thing with Drew Allar is, I have some issues with mechanics. He's a big dude, and when he gets pressured, he doesn't set his feet right, doesn't think right. When he's not pressured, he can make some big throws. But all that said, Daniel, there's no doubt the guy's clutch. With his legs, with his arm, he makes big plays when they need to be made in those games. Stats be danged. And I think he's going to do that again. It's ironic to me that a few years ago there was sort of a clamoring that we're moving on from Clifford to Allar. And a lot of the positives about Clifford are equally true of Allar. I feel like I'm having the same conversation. Clifford was often clutch in big moments. And that's why he kept the starting job even though he wasn't a very good passer. For some reason, I think there's a failure to recognize that their games in some weird ways are actually quite similar. But that's the kind of guy you need right now in college football where defenses, again, if you went and watched that snippet from the Texas-Ohio State preview, which maybe you should now, talked a lot about how defenses are becoming the main story and why that is. Allar's the kind of guy that can find you a drive or two. And Leonard is a good guy with his legs, but I haven't seen it. I don't think he's a guy that finds you a drive when you need it with his arm. I just don't think he is. I think he's a guy that's a constant complement to the offense with his ability to run the ball and a serviceable passer maybe on top of it, but has not progressed the way people hoped and frankly is the guy that I really thought and feared he was when he transferred from Duke. And so I agree with you. I think Penn State, I have Penn State to win this game. I think it's a low-scoring game. I remain the fact that the team that makes the fewest mistakes is going to be the team that wins this game. But I think this is a really, really tough matchup for both teams. Going to be a grind-out affair. And, you know, as I said again that other video, anytime I see the majority of money on one team, and especially in a close-scoring game, I always run the other way. Because I do think Vegas sometimes pushes the spread if they think they can get a lot of public money on one side that they don't think is going to win. That is a way to make a lot of money when you're Vegas. And I think right now the public perception is on Notre Dame because of how good they looked against Georgia. I think that Georgia team was a flawed team to start with. And without Beck, they were just too crippled. Is what it is. Again, I think Notre Dame wins that game every time. That is really not a shot on Notre Dame. I just don't think the Georgia team they played was as a team that ever would have made the national playoffs. Give me Penn State in this one. I think the matchups favor them. I think they're underrated relative to what Notre Dame is, and I think Notre Dame's just going to have too hard of a time offensively.
Yeah, to me it goes back to what I asked you earlier. Which QB finds a good game or a decent game against a great defense? And for all of my criticisms of Allar, I agree with you. I think he's clutch. I think against a bad defense, against USC, and I'm not saying that as a negative. USC, they're not a great defense, but Drew Allar was down bad in that game. And in that fourth quarter and overtime, he was out of his mind. 391 yards passing, 9.1 yards per attempt. And it was all, he dug himself out of a hole in a way that I was impressed with. I think that Riley Leonard, you often say he's a gamer. And I think that's a fair assessment of him. He had a much less of a game against USC in that common opponent. All right, y'all, let us know what you think about this game and who's going to win and if we're way off base. Also, let us know specifically about the quarterbacks. If we're missing the boat on not seeing what we should see with those, let us know how we're crazy, and we will mix it up with y'all in the comments. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.